So as you know, Daniel, a few months ago, I started spending more time in my job search, and I reached out to a few folks in our community. Q Hammerani was one of the
Oh, my
several
boy
individuals.
Q.
Yeah. So we connected, and remember, Q's formerly of Airbnb, now Chief People Officer at Paper. And I was just struck by how he kept referencing the People Leader Accelerator, from the accelerator helping him land the top HR job at Paper to ongoing mentoring with Andrew. Clearly, this is an investment that's seriously paying off for Q.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Q. So Caitlin Cam, another former guest of Modern People Leader, she went through the program as well. And she said that this was the best investment that she's ever made in her HR career, and that it actually helped her land her current job. So if you're looking for ways to raise your game as a people leader, go check them out. Not only will you have access to Andrew, but you're going to have access to their alumni community, to their subject matter experts. And this program was built for venture backed, founder led HR leaders. So if that's you, this is the program for you. It's only offered twice a year. They're closing applications for their next cohort on December 15th. If you want to be one of the 15 people in that next cohort, go to peopleleaderaccelerator.com. That's peopleleaderaccelerator.com. You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast. Today's episode will be a part of our People Leader series, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at and what they really do every day.
Our guest today is Helen Russell, Chief People Officer at Rivian.
Helen, Daniel, how you doing?
Doing well.
Yeah.
Awesome. It is a Tuesday afternoon, I believe, Tuesday evening, depending on where you are in the world. We're super excited to have you on our show today, Helen. This was a Josh Bersin recommendation, and we had Josh on. He came on the show to as part of his PR tour for his new book, Irresistible. And as you know, we follow the same outline for every conversation we have on the Modern People Leader. And you were the one person he said we had to have on the show. I think he gave us a couple, but I think you were at the top. And so we're thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Josh. I mean, he's a tough act to follow. So my goodness.
He really is. Before we had him on the show, and before we started a People Leader HR focused podcast. Daniel knew of who Josh Bersin was or is, but I kind of, as we were preparing, we went through like the history, and man, he has just been here for decades now, providing kind of the cutting edge news. So we, while he has been predicting the trends, you have been executing and implementing all of the trends. And so we love thought leadership conversations, but we love meeting with and conversing with operators, because that's really where the magic happens. That's what results in the trend. And so today we have a lot we want to talk about. But before we jump into that, we have a couple of traditions that we like to follow. The first is called Good News Stories. So we just share a personal work-related story, just something to kick the conversation off with a little positivity or gratitude. Okay. You want to start us off, Helen?
Okay, I'll start you off. Well, it's easy-ish because it's August, which means it's summertime, which means I'm just back from a summer holiday. And I think you have to treasure holidays when you take them. And so I have two boys, they're both at university. And so all of us went to Italy, and we've been to Italy many times when they were little. But when they're little, you don't tour them around all the main tourist places. You do something that has the lowest possible impact on your mental health, which means don't. But now they're 19 and 22. We felt like they were going to be well enough behaved to go around and actually see Italy. So we just spent 8 days going there. We did Milan, Florence, Rome, and then went to Sicily and had time in Palermo. So coming off the back of that, so yeah, it's having those treasured family times just really, really important.
You guys covered a lot of ground. That's a lot of spots in 8 days.
Yeah, we did. We did a couple of nights in each. We did a bit more in Rome and a bit more in Palermo. And we did the train. We flew from Rome to Palermo, but we did the train in between the other cities. And you're reminded just how the transport and the infrastructure and the train service in Europe just makes getting around so effortless, just so effortless.
So easy. We don't have that in the US. So when people are like, wait, you're going to do what? Why would you do that?
It's
But in Europe, it's a lot different. It's a lot better. Have you watched the show White Lotus?
I have, and it's amazing how many people ask me, will we go because of it? I was like, my God, Italy's been going a lot longer than White Lotus. But yes, we weren't in the part of Sicily where the White Lotus scene was shot, but I do know that they had some like disproportionate influx of visitors on the back of that show. So in the same way that Maui did for the first season, although again, shout out to Maui right now, just tragic.
Oh my goodness.
You
What a
know,
horrible situation. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Daniel, that amazing news. It's hard to top 8-day vacation in Italy. Daniel, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I can
What's
go
your good
next.
news? Yeah, pretty good news.
Yeah. So this week I'm in Dallas. My wife has to come to Dallas occasionally for work, but my two brothers live here. So every time we're here, we get to spend time with the family. My parents are here this week as well, and my niece was born a couple of weeks ago. So my older brother Nick had a little girl. It's the first girl in the family, and in a few hours I'll be meeting little Navy for the first time ever. So I'm excited.
That's even harder to top. Belinda must be so excited. Belinda's Daniel's
Oh yeah,
mom.
to have a
She's
granddaughter
been
now.
waiting for a
Yeah.
girl. Yeah, for a long
Proud of my
time.
boys.
My good news this week, again, it's gonna be personal. So this is the first day of school this is the first week of school. First day was yesterday. And I've got to be honest, so my daughters are 13 and 11 now, and it just was like cruise control. Like there wasn't, apart from preteen emotions and just the normal things that come with trying to go to middle school, it wasn't a big change. And so that means hopefully we're getting something right. But it was pretty smooth sailing yesterday.
So is that sixth and eighth grade?
That is 6th and 8th grade. Yeah.
Oh man,
And
what
so
tough years.
my oldest daughter, Astrid, she's 8th grader. So she's like top of the totem pole right now. And my younger daughter, Cora, she started in this private school. It's a public school, but it's a leadership academy for girls, for women. And she's like I think for every 400 applicants, one young girl gets in. And so she was fortunate to get in. And so her first day of school journey was a pretty big deal, because she had to take the bus to school, back, all girls. So, but the highlights were that she had an awesome time. So
That's
success.
great. Yeah.
Success. Well,
Even mine were 5th and 8th grade when we came to the US 9 years ago. And that seems like a minute ago. So the time from now, like where you're at to where I'm at, seems to go like, I don't know why, but in a flash. So you have to treasure every day.
It's scary, yeah, how quickly it goes by. I had the same conversation with Nick, so Daniel's brother, on Friday when Navy entered the world and joined us. Like, it sounds so cliche, but it's so true that it just goes by so fast. Like in the blink of an eye, they're like little adults, and then in your case, like they're literal adults. So,
Yeah.
well, we have a lot. I could talk about good news for an hour, so I'm going to force myself to get into the meat of the conversation. I call the next question the Brene Brown question, and that's, what's your story, Helen? Walk us through this amazing journey that you've been on. You've worked with a number of world-class organizations, and now you're the Chief People Officer at Rivian. And so, yeah, share with us the story of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I'll try and do it quickly, because obviously the older you are, the longer your story. So I'm going to try and make my story sound short to make myself look young. It's a very interesting path, in so much as it wasn't particularly very predetermined. I came from a family where my grandma was a teacher, my mum was a teacher, and all I ever wanted to do was to teach, but I wanted to teach physical education. I did every sport at school. Predominantly swimming was my major sport, but I did every sport. And it was sort of in my blood. And went off to university and went on my first teaching practice and had kids that were 6 months younger than me, because I just graduated. And here I was at university teaching kids that, were like seniors. And so I was like, God, stop that. This is not for me. I'm going to change. So I changed paths, changed my degree, went from an education degree to just a Bachelor of Honors degree, and had a different path. And then I found myself in recruiting, and it was recruiting for a particular client that I was providing them with a lot of employees, and their global head of recruiting and I met for lunch, and she asked me if I would consider coming and working for them and doing the recruiting for them on the inside versus charging them an arm and a leg on the outside. And so that's how I came into corporate life. And then these are all opportunities that were given to me by people who took a risk on me. Because similarly, when I went to Siebel and I was running recruiting for Siebel, and the then global head of HR, a lady called Gabrielle Toledano, was looking for the head of HR for Europe, and I was running recruiting for Europe. And I'd shortlisted candidates for her to meet, and we went out for dinner, and it was like, which one are you going to choose? And she said, I'm not going to choose any of them. Now, as a recruiter, that's like a knife to the heart, because you think you really know what your client is looking for here. And she said, because I want you to do it. And I'm like, I'm not an HR person. And she's like, no, exactly. That's why I really want you to do it. But you have credibility that you've established with the business leaders here. And I think you can build on that to start learning the craft of HR. And technical competence is something that's really important to me. So I made a beeline, especially based in Europe, where the number of jurisdictions you have, the number of countries, and the labor laws are so meaningfully different that unless you're very credible when it comes to the legal side of things, you will not be taken seriously. And so I aligned myself with a number of law firms that we were working with and put myself through as much content as I could so that I could be technically credible, and then use that as the platform to build my career. I took my first global role based in London with a company called Kantar. We had about 30,000 employees, 70 plus countries, a lot of travel. And then on the back of that, decided to make the move to the US 9 years ago and took my next global role, which was with Sonos. Did that for a couple of years and then went to Atlassian, who had just gone public. And Atlassian was really on this sort of real growth trajectory. And Atlassian was going to be where I was going to stay. And a very persuasive headhunter convinced me to meet this founder, this very missionary-driven founder called RJ Scaringe. And we set it up for a half an hour, get to know, meet and greet, talk about culture. And 2 hours into that conversation, it was like, oh God, I'm going to have to do this. And I remember at the end of the conversation, him saying, so Helen, how do you feel? I was like, because I'm very expressive, I was like, absolutely not how I expected to feel. I thought this was going to be a general chat. And now I'm like, oh God, I'm going to have to continue to have the conversations with you. And that's how I ended up at Rivian. So that would have been in the summer of 2019. And then I started with Rivian in October of 2019.
What I love about your story is you have worked with brands that I absolutely love for various reasons. I love Sonos, the speaker systems. Like, they are just so easy to use. If you've ever used a Sonos, like turning it on, because I'm older than Daniel, and so I remember the days where you had to have like a receiver for your audio equipment, you had the wiring and the inputs. And with Sonos, it was like one connection, the app wizard does it all, and they work magically in great sound. All obviously, if you're in software development, Atlassian, you're using some form of Atlassian tool. And in the people space, like, there are so many things that Atlassian has done that has truly innovated, like the way that we approach people, the people function. And now at Rivian, I was mentioning before the call, to my daughter's dismay, my dream car is a Rivian truck. Like, that's what I'm gunning for. They're all Tesla people. And I'm like, you know what? The Tesla truck is not where it's at. I've driven a Mini for multiple, but over the last decade, I've exclusively driven minis, and I've realized like I'm ready for something new, and the Rivian truck is it for me. So love all the brands, and it's like you must be you have a great executive recruiter that you've worked with, or you have an amazing diligence process for the next roles that you select. But it sounds like they somewhat chose you.
Yeah, I think there's an element of luck and in that as well. But yeah, I feel like, yes, they chose me, but it's more than there's a lot of things come your way, because obviously there's always a scenario where there's more opportunities than there are people. And it feels, especially in the people space, and probably even more so through COVID and George Floyd and all of the challenges that came in the sort of 2020 timeframe, that finding the right leader in this space has become more and more challenging. So there's no shortage of opportunities, but it's really hard to discern, how do I select the one that feels right for me and where I can have the right level of impact. And I think that's the key, is being incredibly selective and discerning with making that choice.
And what did this is super relevant to me right now. I don't know if I mentioned to you, Helen, but I sold my previous business, not Modern People Leader, obviously, another company in the HR tech space. And I've kind of been chronicling my job search and figuring out what my next move is through the podcast. And it is a little daunting. And I've gotten some great feedback already. Like, don't jump at the first thing that comes to you. If you're not certain, then take time to process it all. But tell me a little bit more about how you approached making sure that it was the right decision for you, because it feels like such a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it is really hard. I mean, the first thing is, I think you have to be incredibly passionate about the space. There's a lot of really cool companies that come along, and there's a lot to like about the company. But if I'm not passionate about what they do, I mean, you use Sonos as an example. Sonos's mission at the time was fill every home with music. How can you not get excited about that? And working in an environment where music is just playing all of the time, it's so good for the soul and just for your mood. And Rivian's mission is keep the world adventurous forever. And everything that we're here to do is, we exist to combat climate change. And so, first of all, just having something that really appeals to you at your core from a mission and values perspective. Secondly, it's all about the boss. It's all about the boss. And I think especially in a role where there's so much of what we do that's determining the culture and the environment in which our employees survive and thrive, mainly thrive. We don't just want them to survive. Then you have to make sure that you are selecting someone who is going to create and be passionate, or as passionate as you are about that environment, and isn't going to waver when some of those tough decisions are required. So that I always use the example of the talented arsehole, right? We want a really healthy culture until we've got a really talented arsehole that, or we don't really want to call them or get rid of them because they're talented. It's like, but they're sort of an arsehole. So let's just really focus on the whole here and do the right thing. And I think having someone who isn't going to waver when it comes to what's the right thing for the culture is really, really important. And I felt in RJ, we sort of had a meeting of minds around that. And then also, for me, it's about having the autonomy and space to have impact. And so that means also working with someone who's going to trust you and who's going to give trust quickly and allow you to get on with it, and to be creative and have the space to have impact. And that means someone, and that's why I think I've sort of gravitated towards founder environment, Stephen, because founders tend to be very first principled. They haven't had other jobs before. And so they're coming at this and saying, right, I can't use playbooks from the past. I have to come at this and say, what feels like the right thing here, and use my brain and my curiosity to figure that out. And so that then in of itself creates a very environment where you can try and fail and learn and innovate. And I think that also has a lot of appeal for me.
So you mentioned that it feels like there are more opportunities out there than there are people. And,
Sure.
especially in these last few years, it's become more and more challenging finding, I guess, like the right people leader. So, and this is something we're hearing all the time. Why do you think that is? And what do you think that CEOs and founders are looking for from their people leader?
I think, again, this is only my hypothesis. So I'm not saying this is based on fact. This is just based on sort of gut. I do think that the early days of startup companies, it was very important to appoint your CFO because you had to get the financials right. It was very important to appoint your GC because you had to be protected. You then needed your product and your sales leaders, but the people side of things you could get to. As long as you knew how to recruit people, you could get to that. And I think what's happened with the pressure that companies are feeling, and that has only accelerated over the course of the early 20s, the early startups that were waiting and waiting in order to go out and appoint their people leader, is certainly a heavier hitter, are bringing forward the time horizon by which they're going out and looking for that senior person, because they know that framing the culture, setting the stage, getting the environment right, getting their arms around all of the complexities that come with building a business, they want to get out ahead of that. And they're realizing that they shouldn't wait. Whereas maybe 5-10 years earlier, companies were waiting and they were only coming out and looking for a heavier hitter when they had more scale. But that's my hypothesis. I think they're just making that decision a lot earlier, which means that the number of opportunities is increasing and the talent pool is the same size right now until more people are coming through.
I agree with your hypothesis. I think that in the past, it was viewed the people function as like something that's upgradable. Like, oh, we can just upgrade that in the future. Right now, I just need the light. I need the basic package. And so let's hire the best talent acquisition person that we have with the agency we're working with. We'll appoint that person as the first people leader or VP of people, whatever we call it. And we can always upgrade and reconfigure later. And I think the pace at which business moves today makes that a lot more difficult. And I think that we've now there have been a few startup cycles now over the last 20, 30 years. And I think there's proof points that show a difference in trajectory. So all growth is not good growth. And I think there are CEOs and founders now, they're like, ooh, I want the good growth. And I see that the companies that achieve the kind of growth the way that I want to achieve it, have a strong people leader in place from the beginning, or as early as they can.
Yeah, and we were talking as well, that if you think about it, the younger generation in the workplace, they're a more discerning customer too. So they're saying, I'm only going to come and work for you if you, company X, have figured this out. And so that means figuring it out means healthy culture, healthy environment, high moral standards, taking a stance and a point of view on social impact messages and themes. And so you need somebody that's considering all of those things in order to attract the talent that you even want to attract in the door.
And so we talked already a little bit about Rivian's business. So I'm going to skip the question where we ask, and I think most people these days are up to speed with the EV market and are familiar with the Rivian brand. But I am going to ask the last question before we move on to the core discussion today, and that is, why should we be jealous or envious that you get to work at Rivian?
Well, hopefully, because, I think I know why you're slightly jealous, Stephen. Now I know that now once he is in your future. So certainly we get our hands on the product earlier than everybody else. So we're lucky enough to be driving around in our products. So that's something that I think is pretty cool. I also would say that how eclectic our business is both what makes it challenging, but also what makes it really exciting. And when I say eclectic, I mean just the complexity that goes into building a vehicle is one thing. And there are many companies out there that build vehicles, but we also want to build charging infrastructure and make sure that as the world evolves and transitions to electric, that we have some role in making sure that in the same way you drive to the to the petrol or gas station, you also have an opportunity to charge your vehicle. How do we do that? And also through the steps and sort of ambitions that we have from a technology standpoint, that a little bit like Sonos, and this is where it sounds odd that I draw comparisons to Sonos, but the advantage when you have such a technologically enabled product is it gets better with age. And the advantage, of course, when you have technology-enabled products like a Rivian is it gets better with age. I mean, we get so excited about our software updates that you can be driving a vehicle that 3 months down the line has had 3 or 4 different software updates and is doing things 3 or 4 months down the line that it wasn't doing 3 or 4 months earlier. And so there's not many things that get better with age. They're really, and I think that's something that also like there's like a little present awaiting you every couple of months here because of the software upgrades.
And do you, as a Rivian employee, do you get like a stipend that you can put towards like a lease, or do you get like a
yes
nice deal?
Okay, there's an extra, you get support monthly to put towards the product.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, my wife works for another auto company, and that's one of her biggest perks. And I'm like, Rivian's pretty cool. Like, maybe if they're ever hiring for your role, you should apply. Hopefully her boss isn't listening to this. But yeah, no, I like Steven, I dream to one day drive a Rivian. So one day we'll make it happen. So when we met a few months ago, I think that you shared that y'all were at 700 employees when you started in late 2019. And today you're closer to around 16,000. Is that right?
We're at 15, just over 15,000
Just
right
over
now.
15. Wow. Okay, that's a lot of growth over the last few years. And I imagine working at a company like Rivian that has experienced that type of growth, there's a special feeling being a part of that. Like, I could only imagine if I was employee number 50 and now you're close to 16,000. Like, that's special. I don't think many people get to experience that. I certainly haven't. And, given that y'all have added so many people since you started, most of which during COVID, how have y'all been able to capture the essence of Rivian and what it means to work for Rivian from those early days?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's the biggest challenge I think every growing company faces. Because certainly in the early days, and again, we had about 9 people that were the early founders of Rivian along with RJ, and we still call them the OGs. And our OGs are an integral part of Rivian because they've just been there since the very beginning. And they took one road and then they took a slightly different pivot because we were going to develop a sports car, and then pivoted and decided to go the direction of more the adventure vehicles. And to hear some of the stories of their early days, honestly, it's really, really heartwarming. And so there was a lot of what they had sort of constructed in those early days that we really tried to hang on to. And there were elements like, I remember coming in and saying, talk to me about what was important when you were setting this company up. Like, what's the ideal company, RJ, that you wanted to work for? Because you now had the opportunity to create that. And it was everything about treat people as people, how to zoom out and sort of keep perspective, how to be this very sort of first principled approach rather than taking playbooks of before. Because I think if you're in a very innovative space and you're trying to carve out a new space, it almost feels blasphemous as a founder and CEO to then hire people that are like, oh no, I've done this 15 times before, don't worry, we can just apply it here. That almost is like I always joke that if anybody says, well, when I was at so-and-so, this is what we used to do, that like the windows come down, the doors shut, and somebody comes behind you and says, what did you just say? With a shining light in your eyes. Because it's like, we just don't use terms like that. And so the key is, first of all, how do we continue to hire the people that will augment our culture? And I say augment, not add. Because I think add assumes we like this and we're just going to add and keep it exactly the same. Whereas augment means that we are going to morph and we ideally want to get better over time. So the types of individuals that are going to augment your culture. And to my earlier point, be really quick when you get it wrong. So I always use an example, and it was actually John Nader, who was on the board at Sonos, that used to describe it this way, that culture is like a electric current. And when you put a block of wood in that current, the electric no longer conducts. And that's the equivalent of putting a wrong manager in a hierarchy, because the culture no longer conducts below that manager. That manager now resets the tone of what it feels like to work in this company. And so it's incumbent on us to make sure that at every level, we have people that continue to build the culture and have their people experience it in the same way that others are, all the way through the org structure. And so it's about the hiring, it's about the onboarding. We still onboard in exactly the same way we did through COVID. We all had to learn to do it in a remote way during COVID, and we've kept doing it that way post-COVID. Because what it allows us to do is to take one way and have everybody have the identical experience on a Monday morning when they come in. And between myself and Ben Putman, who leads learning, him and I alternate every week, and we come and we talk about our culture, because we want that consistent experience for everybody that comes in. And it's the most enjoyable 1 hour of my week, because you're catching people when they're like, that, my God, I've just joined a new company. And similarly for Ben, he's far better at it than I am, because he's a learning guy and he's always a lot more interactive and raises the bar for me. But it's the favorite hour of the week, because it's our opportunity to infuse the culture into how everybody feels on day one. And then a lot of it then is making sure that when we're coming and we're sitting down doing what we call our quarterly recharge conversation. So I'm sitting down with you, Daniel, and we called it recharge because we didn't want it to be called bloody performance management. And the whole idea is that when you and I finish this conversation, you're going to feel recharged. I've just filled you up with electricity, and you're going to be able to walk away from here and feel awesome. And so the idea in the quarterly recharge is I'm talking to you, Daniel, about not only what you've done, but how you've done it. And have you done it in a consistent way to how we want this culture to evolve? And so we've tried to infuse it through every single thing that we do, and not have it be, which it has been in previous lives, certainly early in my career, where you talk about your culture when you come in and then you never hear about it again, or you do because it's on the back of your badge. And you have to pick up your badge and you're like, God, I can remember those 4 values. I can't remember the 5th. What is it again? And if that's the case, you failed. Like, this has to be part of your vocabulary every single day. And I would say, finally, over communicate. We do a all hands every Friday morning, every second Friday morning. And RJ leads it every second Friday morning. And that is our opportunity to constantly reinforce all aspects of culture. And that's his moment to make sure that those 9 employees, how they felt when they got to work with him every day. Now we have 15,000 people that feel like they're seeing him and experiencing him in this very intimate setting. And we want them to feel the same way.
First, thank you for bringing culture back to our conversation. I feel like culture in the 2010s, we talked a lot about culture, and then as the recent run up in the market leading up to COVID, the focus changed from culture to engagement or listening or employee experience. And I think that culture is a huge part of, if not the huge part, if not the most important part of your employer value proposition, the employee experience. You know, what makes it unique and vibrant is the culture, right? And so one of the things you mentioned in your previous response was that you need to be really quick when you get it wrong. And so I'm just curious, like, how, I think one of the reasons why people moved away from the culture conversation is because it's a hard topic it's a hard construct to wrap your head around, right? And I think that it can feel a little bit nebulous and hard to measure. And today we live in a very kind of data-driven world. And so I know there's some new culture apps and some new tools, and AI is going to unlock a lot of potential in terms of what you can do with culture. But today, what are some of the ways that you measure culture and try to get your red flags when something may be going wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it is really hard. And I think we can also massively overcomplicate it. I mean, ultimately, culture is like, how am I expected to behave every day? In this environment, how am I expected to behave? And we built our leadership model. And the first pillar of our leadership model is be a good human. That's it. Be a good human. I mean, if we were all good humans every day, culture would be really, really healthy because we would just instinctively do the right thing. And so I do think there's an element of just be a really, really good human. And I think secondly, as part of that, have a mindset that you're solving at the system level, not at the subsystem level. And so what I mean by that is I'm doing the right thing for Rivian versus doing the right thing for my function, my team, and last of all, myself. So you're looking for this incredible amount of humility and enterprise thinking that allows you to constantly solve at the system level. And I think if you can have a culture that's far more we than me and full of lots of humility and really good human beings, it's really easy. Now, that's really hard to get that first bit right because you've got to get it right every time. And so when I say that's really easy, then you've got to measure it. So we're surveying twice a year and we're pulsing in between. And we're asking a lot of questions that ultimately get under the skin of, are you working for a really good human? And there's various different questions, and we work with Qualtrics to make sure that we're getting our questions right, and we're tweaking a little bit now and again, and really getting at belonging. Do you feel like you should be here? Do you feel like you've got a voice here? Do you feel like you're heard? All of the things that just make an environment where you can turn up every day and do your damn best work. And how do we make sure that that environment enables that? But I think ultimately it's really about being a good human being. I don't think it's any more complicated than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, and it was about onboarding and how you really have to nail it. Just speaking from my experience as an individual contributor, when I was working at Humu, I had the best onboarding experience that I ever had. It was like this 2-week onboarding program. There was an introduction from the company. There was a graduation. There were a series of meetings that they set you up with. One of them was with the HR leader. One of them was with the CEO. One of them was with the head of sales. One of them was the head of customer success. So it was really like a boot camp of learning as much as we possibly could about the business within 2 weeks and learning about the culture. And I'm curious, I feel like Rivian has a very unique culture just from what I've seen on the website, just from the fact that the first time I ever heard about Rivian was from Alex Honnold, the guy from Free Solo. That was the first time I ever saw Rivian. I was like, what the hell is he driving? Like, that is cool. Like, there's just something about the culture. And I feel like it's really hard to, I guess, like, teach that or show that. So I'm curious, like, what does the onboarding process look like at Rivian?
And again, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying we've got it right, as in we've got it perfectly right, because I don't want, again, humility for me is my favorite and number one leadership trait. And the last thing I'm going to do is to sit here and act like, don't worry, we've nailed this, because of course we haven't. Culture to me is also something you're always aspiring to. Because all of us don't go to bed every night and say, today I was the perfect human being. It was an amazing day. We all go to bed at night like, I wish I'd maybe just not done that or not reacted in that way. So it's always an aspirational thing. But from an onboarding standpoint, I would say what we've learned, Daniel, is because we deliberated the sort of boot camp approach. And I think it works in some areas, it doesn't work in others. And the reason I say that is at the plant where we're onboarding our employees at the plant, we're equipping someone to be working on the line. And so there we have a very intense 2-week boot camp where we have mock lines and you are literally building a make-believe vehicle in preparation for you to be ready to go and take up whatever place on the line that you're having. So in some areas, that's really relevant. What we were finding in some of our salaried workforce was when we went so intense in the first week, there was a lot of things we were bombarding them with information and they weren't retaining it. And also a lot of the learning that people like to do, they like to do asynchronously. So we've come up with a blended approach where there's an intensity to the first couple of days. But rather than bringing all the leaders in and having you have exposure to them all in the first couple of weeks, we drip feed that over the first 3 months. And so it's over those first 3 months that the leaders are coming in And we call it Zoom Out with a Rivian Leader. And that's your opportunity to hear from them, their leadership journey, and then have Q&A as part of that. And then also put content online so that they can consume that asynchronously whenever it's convenient for them. But you're just trying to give this balance of content around welcome me to Rivian. Like, what do I need to know at the enterprise level? Welcome me to my function. Welcome me to my team. And that's how we sort of think about the onboarding and the different chunks that we break that into for whatever that experience needs to be for you.
I love that. Yeah. And I guess looking back on my experience, it is really intense getting all that information. And I don't know. I guess if it would have been like extended out a little bit longer, like, and again, there's no perfect way of doing it. It kind of keeps that excitement going, right?
Yeah,
It's
no problem. And again, some people want it all at once. Other people so again, a lot of it depends on the learner too. So you're trying to, there's not a one size fits all approach. So this blended approach seems to be where we've landed, certainly for now.
Yeah. So one thing that really stood out to me when we first met was you mentioned that at Rivian, y'all are trying to change the face of what it looks like to be a manufacturing employee. So I guess before I ask anything else, like what did you mean by that?
Yeah, and this goes back to my interview, my first 30-minute get to know RJ conversation. And my team love it when I tell this story, because during the interview, he was actually at the plant. And bearing in mind, our plant had previously been Mitsubishi owned, and that plant had closed. And a lot of people in the area of Bloomington Normal in Illinois lost their jobs. And it affected, obviously, many livelihoods, because what had been a big employer in that town suddenly disappeared and people were unable to find work. And so it just so happened that the day RJ and I were talking, he had bumped into a couple that had both worked at Mitsubishi, lost their jobs, and now had been re-employed by Rivian. And they'd waved him down on the golf cart as he was working his way around the plant, what was a very desolate, empty space, because we were sort of tearing it down and ready to build it back up and to have it be electrified. And they were just so grateful to him personally for taking a chance on Bloomington Normal and putting this factory back on the map. And not just any old factory back on the map, but the future of automotive back on the map. And so that had made him quite emotional. And then he'd come upstairs and found this beautiful hand-carved wooden table in the meeting room where he was going to do the Zoom with me. And he was like, who's done these tables? And it turned out that these tables had appeared in various different offices, and they'd been done as a surprise to RJ by also a couple of former Mitsubishi employees who'd lost their jobs, who'd done carpentry as a job on the side, and then did these tables as a thank you. I mean, it sort of gives you goosebumps, right? And so by the time he got to me, he'd had these couple of emotional experiences. So first of all, the fact that he was telling me he'd had a couple of emotional experiences was shocking enough that him and I, this is him disclosing this and being vulnerable enough in our first interaction. So I already loved him. And it showed me that he was a really good human. But secondly, this was not just us building a factory. This was us building a factory in a place that had been really impacted by the previous company folding, and we were affecting people's livelihoods. Now, I grew up in the north of England in a mining area that in the 80s, when I was in high school, the coal mines closed. The UK government decided that we weren't going to be mining for coal, and a lot of the coal mines closed. So I realized and experienced as a kid what it feels like to have the livelihoods of all of your friends and family be sort of destroyed by a decision. Now, in that case, it was a decision at the government level. And here I was, X many years later, talking to RJ and realizing that, my God, it's almost like my life's come full circle, because here we have an opportunity to give back to a community that was hit in a very similar way that I'd experienced as a kid. And so we had this meeting of minds around this, and he was like, we have an opportunity, Helen, to really change the face of what it feels like to work in manufacturing, and what it feels like that whether you're an hourly worker or a salary worker, we still come and treat you in the same way as the same human being. And it massively resonated with me. And so one of the most challenging things we navigated, and I always get quite emotional thinking about this during COVID, was you think about, you have this thing in your mind where it's like, how do we make sure that everybody feels like we're treating them with the same level of dignity and respect? COVID hits. Now, the world of technology and technology companies can suddenly say, don't worry, everybody, work from home. Here we are with a factory that's just in the middle of build, where we are at deadlines and at great pains to get everything ready to go. And we can't say the same thing. Now, we did for a couple of weeks where we just said, let's just figure out what's going on here. Let's get our arms around it. But at some point, we knew that that wasn't going to be sustainable and we'd have to bring people back into the workplace. And so it almost felt like the first test came when it was like, how do you make sure your hourly employees feel as beloved as your salary employees who you're saying stay home and you're telling your hourly employees come in? Like, how do you do that in a way that shows the same care and respect? And so we had to be very intentional about our communication. I sent an email every single Friday for a year and a half, showing and outlining all the steps we were taking, what we were hearing, what we were seeing, to make sure that everybody felt that we were doing the best that we possibly could to create the safest of environments for everybody that was coming in. But it was almost like this challenge hit us that we'd never envisaged and could have really flown in the face of what we were trying to achieve, which was this more egalitarian, we believe in you and you're as integral to the success of our company as everybody else. Sorry, that was a very long story, but it's like
no, that was a great story. And I have a follow-up question. One of the things that as we were talking earlier, I sold my prior business, which was employee measurement. So similar to Qualtrics, employee surveys, employee listening. And we worked with a lot of high tech. It was very competitive to win high tech companies. So we worked with a lot of what I would consider traditional businesses, like non-sexy type businesses, like grocery stores, Caterpillar distributors, manufacturing, cinemas. And one of the things that, in fact, I think back to one customer client in particular. In their data, there was always an us versus them between, this company in particular had a software or kind of online e-commerce digital presence. And then they were the developers of the software that helped build the product that they have. And then you had the manufacturing line. And even from where people worked, there was a divide. And so there was a divide in everything. And they really struggled, and they had to be very intentional about communication. You mentioned communication earlier, because some things have to be different, right? There are laws that result in whether you want it to be a fully egalitarian or full like equity for everyone, that isn't actually possible because of some of the rules and regs. And so I'm curious, how have you all balanced that at Rivian? Because it sounds like you've invested a lot in culture. You're being super intentional. Has that been an issue or a concern and something that you guys have looked at?
Yeah, you don't hear language us and them. You don't hear that in the same way that would be true in other environments. But it's hard when you're in a role that requires you to be clocking in and clocking off and not leaving the line until someone says you can do so, and having to do overtime because we need those extra hours. You can't just decide I'm going to do the school run this morning and I'm going to be in half an hour later so I can leave half an hour later. You don't have that level of flexibility in that type of role. So the reality is we can't be fake about it and pretend that it's all kumbaya, because it isn't. That the roles are materially different and demand different things of them. So I think we have to be realistic. But that doesn't mean to say the dignity and respect and listening and asking questions and curiosity that we apply at the plant can be as consistent as the curiosity and listening and voice of others elsewhere across the business. And I think as long as a human being, you feel like I have a voice, like if I have an opinion, I'm going to be heard, I still get on a regular basis from people at the plant and emails on a regular basis. Now, I'm sort of flattered by that because they're comfortable enough that they feel that they can do that. It sort of tells me that I'm approachable and that's okay for them to do. And also it tells me that, and they're comfortable asking or voicing whatever is on their mind. Now, it may not be that we can address it because we're never going to make everybody happy all of the time, but we listen enough to know how do we try and make sure that we're catering for the majority as best we possibly can, because we really want that direct relationship and we want that dialogue, not monologue, with our employees.
So one consistent theme throughout this conversation is that Rivian doesn't just do things because that's how it's always been done. And
sounds like the opposite, Daniel. You know,
yeah. And I imagine that the experience for a factory employee is probably a bit different than maybe they'd get elsewhere. And obviously, like, there's some things that you can't change about being a factory employee, but what are some of the things that y'all have done to try to make that experience better than maybe what they've experienced in the past?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you one example that I think demonstrates how we think about our folks there. So when we did our IPO, now, of course, when you go through your IPO, you see all of the stock photographs, somebody standing in a room somewhere in New York with their banner in front of them and the confetti coming down, and, you know, just replace any company's name in front of every company's name, right? And we were just like, we're really not like a New York NASDAQ type of company. That's just not really our jam. And at the heart of who we are building vehicles. So we approached NASDAQ and we said, how would you feel if we did our IPO at the plant? And they were like, whoa, okay. But anyway, they were awesome. And we had our IPO day at the plant. So we stopped production. We set everything up with a certain area of the factory behind us where we knew we'd have space. We had all of our team members up on the balconies, all around the walkways that are all up above the factory. And the TV cameras and everything was there so that every single team member got to experience Rivian going public in exactly the same way as the top team that was standing right there behind the pedestal. And so we just felt that it was the perfect place and was so on brand for us to do it differently and to have it be as inclusive an experience as possible. And for those that were at other offices around the world, they also had that morning marked and a similar sort of setup in those offices so that we could try and make this feel as inclusive as possible. But that's, I think, an example of how we really tried to make that feel different. It wasn't just the higher ups heading off to New York in some fancy schmancy place doing an IPO. So that's a classic example, I think, of how we tried to be different.
I literally have goosebumps over here just listening to that story. Yeah, shout out to you and the rest of the leadership team for making that decision. I have goosebumps over here.
Take a lot of credit for that. But again, it's very RJ to be that. Again, humility is at the heart of a lot of this, right? It's like, you don't have to be arrogant or hierarchical, or there's like just a level of humility that exists.
Well, and I think my guess, I don't know RJ, I've never met RJ, but it sounds to me like he really understands the relational aspects of these decisions, because that is huge for any entrepreneur to get to IPO. Like, I got to exit, and that felt like such a huge accomplishment and such a big day. That is so small. It feels like it pales in comparison to like an IPO. And for even in that moment, for your leader, right, your CEO, to say, you know what, we're going to do things different, and our priority is going to be here in the factory. Like, that's just such a powerful management leadership decision to make. And I can only imagine it must have just been buzzing across the company.
It was utterly incredible. And then I remember in the afternoon being up on the balcony back in the main building, and you're looking through glass down onto the factory, and you could see all of our team members all going, and everybody was having selfies placed in front with themselves in front of the NASDAQ sign. So there must be thousands of selfies out there of everybody who had the opportunity to do that day, which was just, it was just awesome.
Sounds so amazing. So amazing. One thing, switching gears a bit, that jumped out at me from our prep call was that you mentioned there's a difference between scale and scaling. And I want to talk about that because I hadn't really thought about it that way. And so to you, what's the distinction between scaling a company and operating at scale?
Yeah, it's I love this question because I'm so passionate about this. And it's interesting actually, because I did a bit of extra research on this, because there's not just the scaling and at scale, but there's also what's going on while you are scaling. And there's this research that's been done by entrepreneur.com, and they talk about 5 major inflection points that a company experiences. And all of these inflection points are requiring the company to pivot or change in some way. And we were doing all 5 all at the same time. So number 1, entering a new market. Now, whether that new market is a new market geographically or a new market product-wise, entering a new market, number 1. Number 2, launching a new product. Well, yeah, did that. In fact, we did 3 at the same time. Changes in your industry, just a little bit, because this is really carving out an industry. Now, Tesla really paved the way for us, but here we were coming with a different product into that industry and sort of trying to stretch the boundaries of that industry in the way that we did. New competitors entering your market. Well, we're seeing a lot of fast followers coming into this market and competing for the same market share that we're after. And then finally seeking investment. Now, we did a lot of rounds of private investments way before we became a public company. And so one of those is an inflection point, a major inflection point. And we did all 5 of the damn things over the course of the last few years. So when you pile on top of that, all of these major inflection moments, as well as the growth that we went through. And again, just to put a finer point on the growth. So we ended 2019 with 1,000 employees. We ended 2020, which was the COVID year, with 3,500. We ended 21 with 10,500, and we were at 16,000 by the middle of 22. So we went from 1,000 to 16 in just over 2.5 years, plus all of those inflection points. And so when you think about what does that require from a leadership perspective, it means that in any given day, the decisions that you're making on that day are never to solve today's problems. They're to solve the problems of tomorrow, and a tomorrow that you don't even know what tomorrow is going to look like. So you're constantly making 5x decisions. Like, I'm going to make a decision today that's still going to work when we 5 times the size or scale or complexity of where we are right now. And not everybody can do that, because it takes a level of agility, it takes a level of humility and curiosity and failing fast and learning to be able to do that. At the same time, not everybody knows what 5 times the size of this looks like or feels like. And so the leaders that know what that looks like and feels like have done big company jobs. So that to me is the at scale. And then the running fast to grow is the scaling. And so unless you know what it looks like over the other side of the hill, you don't quite know what you're building towards. If you've only ever worked on the other side of the hill and you don't know how to build, then you're also going to really struggle. And so what our learning was that we had to make sure that we hired leaders that had done both. Because there are a handful of people that have just got what it takes without knowing what it looks like on the other side that are able to make it. And we have them, and they are incredible, but they are in the absolute minority. The majority of people that are successful here have done both. And when you actually are out looking, it's hard to find people that have done both and that have all of the how, right? All of the cultural attributes that you're also looking for as well. So that's where I see as a differentiation. And I guess one example I can share of where people failed was they were so focused on the now and not building for the tomorrow. And the way I describe it is your day job is just solving the now. Your night job is building your team for tomorrow. And it takes That means you're working day and night, certainly in the early years, to get to where you need to get to. So there's also a level of grit and determination and all of those softer skills that come with it.
And so as my guess is that you just didn't wake up one day and you had the perfect group of leaders that could think in the scaling kind of way, but also had the experience of being on the other end of that kind of growth. And so was there in my experience, you don't outgrow a leadership team member. If it's not a cultural fit, that usually is a binary thing. And maybe it takes, you need data, right? You need more data to actually conclude like, okay, we absolutely need to make a change here. But when you don't grow out of a leadership team member overnight, that's usually a process that happens over time. And so in that kind of latter scenario where you're growing, you're going to grow out of a leadership team member over a period of time. Are there certain things that you're looking at to understand, will she be able to make it to the next phase, at least as a stopgap until we can find that perfect person? How would you, as the chief people officer, look at those sorts of nuances within the leadership team?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Stephen. I think there's a couple of ways that we came at it. First of all, you can spot relatively quickly who's going to make it and who's not. The challenge becomes, because at the pace at which we were growing, where is it higher risk to leave someone struggling? And so you have to come at it from like a risk reward, like in what order do we go at this? Because at any given time, there may be 3 or 4 people on your team that you can see are not going to be able to get us to the next level. But you can't expose the company or your function or your team to making all of those calls at the same time. So it comes down to what priority do we go after this? And in other words, what would present the most risk if this person isn't able to get to where we need to get to them as quickly as we need to get to? And you have to prioritize. And so it's a little bit ruthless, because you have to sort of, it becomes like a risk sort of spectrum, if you will. And so then it's a case of, right, we're going to have to, and oftentimes you're making a decision as, do we start looking, is this going to be a hard to fill role? Do we start looking in the market softly now? Because it's going to take us some time to find this profile. And do we think that this leader, actually, in many cases, you still really want the person. It's just that the role that you want them to do is not the role that they're currently doing, and you need to level somebody in between. And so the ideal scenario is you have someone with the humility and self-awareness to say, I get it, but I'm really committed to this company. And ideally, I'll just stay a click down from where I am now, and you bring in somebody above me who I can still continue to learn and grow under. Not everybody is able to swallow that and make that choice. You hope that they will, but not everybody is able to do that.
And so you and RJ, it sounds like it's an ongoing dialogue that the two of you are having. Is this like a weekly, monthly, quarterly? Like how, just orders of magnitude? I know it's probably not, you don't have like a meeting in the calendar, maybe you do, but I'm just curious, like how often are you guys getting aligned on this?
We're talking about it all of the time. And even though it's not a specific meeting to cover it, you'll be covering something else. And then it may be that in the context of how somebody showed up, or in the context of what you need out of this area over here, then it's like, do we think, are we seeing traction? And again, some people will really surprise you and just continue to grow. But yeah, I would say this has been, over my almost 4 years here, a weekly conversation.
Love it. And so we've talked about the importance of having the right people in the right seats, and for the right phase of your company's existence. And so now let's talk a little bit about decision-making, because again, in my experience, you could have the right individuals in the right roles, but if we are not functioning and making the right decisions as a collective group of leaders, we will fail. Like it's something we may be able to get through a short period of time, but over the mid to long run, if you don't have a solid decision-making framework in place, it's going to be really tough to achieve the types of goals that you want to achieve. And so what does that look like for the Rivian leadership team?
Yeah, and again, the reason decision making became a thing for us was because we found that we were okay at it, but we were only scoring ourselves a B- on decision making, and we knew that we need to get ourselves up to be an A. And there's many reasons why decision making is hard in various different companies in different environments. What we acknowledged and attributed some of our challenges to was a couple of things. First of all, we're a highly collaborative company. Again, when you hire really nice people, it's a company where people really like to come to work. There's a social and human aspect to it, which means having a tough conversation with you, Stephen, might be a little bit uncomfortable. And when we've got to make a really tough decision on something where you think black and I think white, I don't know if I really want to go at it with you, because the answer isn't gray. The answer has to be black or white. But we have to determine, how do we get to that answer in a way that you and I still have a relationship coming out of it. And so a relational culture makes some of those decisions challenging. So that's number one. So there's a cultural aspect to it. The second aspect to it is this is a highly, highly complex business. You think about the number of parts that go into making a vehicle, and we design it, we do all the product development of it, we do the manufacturing of it, we then ship it, we sell it. Like every aspect of our life cycle is handled internally. And so the complexity of just putting that product together means that you're pulling in multiple teams in order to opine on whatever decision needs to be made. Now, if you're a designer, you're driven by having the aesthetic of that product be the best it can possibly be. If you're a product developer, you're driven by having the performance of that vehicle be the best it can possibly be. If you're a manufacturer, our COO, he wants you to give him a product that is as manufacturable as possible. Massively competing goals. And so what Chief Design Officer Jeff wants is always going to be the most beautiful aesthetic, but that might not be, if you're Claire, our CFO, the most cost-effective thing to do, right? So there's all of these competing perspectives coming in, which means that trying to get to a decision on something where there's natural tension that exists is hard. And so we realized that we had to be a little bit more formulaic about it, and we implemented and have been implementing the RAPID framework. And that isn't to get all bureaucratic, because we still want to be as agile as possible, but it's to be really, really clear up front who owns the decision on this, and let's very quickly move forward. And by the way, if we can't come to a decision, and let's use the example of Stephen thinks black and Helen thinks white, how do we cleanly and quickly escalate in order to address that? And so what do I mean by cleanly and quickly escalate? Well, what it isn't is I run to RJ and say, I think white, and my idea is so much better than Stephen who thinks black, so can you just go with white? It's Stephen and I go together and we say, we're at an impasse. I think white for these reasons. Stephen thinks black for these reasons. We will align and disagree and commit. We just need you to help make a decision. And we think that you'll have a better vantage point in solving at the system level, because we're solving maybe more at the subsystem level in order to get the right outcome. And that clean escalation is absolutely paramount, because you and I still have a relationship at the end of it. I didn't go behind your back. You didn't go behind mine. He made a decision and we move on. And so it preserves the cultural attributes that you're trying to preserve. And it starts to get after some of the complexity of decision-making that exists within this really, really complex system.
There's nothing that feels worse. And depending on how you're wired, for me, it's either like feeling really icky, or like I get sent straight into a place of anger when I feel like others have been conspiring and have been incongruent in what they've told me. Like, oh, yeah, let's take this to RJ. Let's talk about it, and only to like get to the meeting. And it's like, oh, well, here are the reasons why this is great, i.e. my position, and here are all the reasons why your idea is terrible. And I feel like that happens a lot.
It's the best way to erode trust, right? The best way to erode trust is to do just that.
And so when you are working through these, so like I'm guessing, is this like the rapid framework, the leadership team, do you invest time to train on how this works and revisit it?
Yeah. And that's my team's job, has been to really roll this out and really start to educate people how to use it. We've had some interesting conversations. It's like, God, we can't even figure out who's the D, because the D really is who's got the decision. Because sometimes the decisions are so complex, it's like we don't even know ultimately who's the D here. And so it's like, escalate that. Let's be quick. Let's not spend weeks cycling around who should make the damn decision. Let's figure out that really quickly and let's get on with it. And so we're trying to make this be as agile as possible. And ultimately, and both my head of L&D and I have used this in a previous life. And what we found was that the vernacular that stuck wasn't the R, the A, the P, the I, it was who's the D. Because once you know who the decision maker is, it's really quick. And also it allows you to have these wasted meetings be removed from your life. So we are saying to everybody, you have permission when you get on a call and you're supposed to be making a decision on something. First of all, you say, who's the D? If you can't answer it, then you cancel the meeting until you figure out who it is, because that's a complete waste of time. And if the D isn't even in the room, or none of the key contributors to that decision aren't in the room, then you also cancel the meeting. So it's also trying to have people be very, very thoughtful with how their time is being used, so that you're still trying to keep this level of agility. And we still want to try and still feel like a small company being fast, right?
Love it.
I wish we could keep digging into this, but as Stephen likes to say, it's that time. We have to turn the corner. We have to get into our rapid fire questions.
We could keep talking for hours and hours on this stuff. So I feel like every time in the conversation we get to that point.
And I'm glad that we booked extra time with you. Usually we only have 60 minutes, so it feels like we're having to rush through it. And I think I shared this with Stephen yesterday. I was like, if we had like a Mount Rushmore of modern people leader guests, I think that Helen would be on it. So yeah, thanks for joining us. This has been, we're in the background. Stephen's like, oh, another great clip. Like, this is just, it's amazing.
Thank
All
you.
right. So rapid fire questions. And we ask the same set of questions to every guest. We tweak it from time to time. But question 1, how do you define a modern people leader? What are the traits and characteristics?
Okay, really easy. And it won't surprise you that my first one will be humble. Humble, compassionate, curious, and candid.
I like it. All right, question 2. If you could go back in time and talk to a 22-year-old you, what career advice would you give yourself and why?
It's really timely, because I have a 22-year-old son who is me, reincarnated as a male. And my constant advice to him is, you have plenty of time. You have plenty of time. Because he is very ambitious and really wants to change the world, and thinks that he has to do it through his next 2 internships and what that next job's going to be, and that next job's going to be, and that next. And I'm like, just enjoy university. Just enjoy university. So you're going to be working for a long time. Take your time.
That's timely advice. I have one year left of my 20s. And I'm like, oh man, like look at all these other 29-year-olds that have accomplished all of these things. Like, what have I accomplished? But you're right. I'm gonna be working for a long time. So there's
and again, you have to remember that they're the minority. Again, having worked for all of these founders, they're all young and just like incredibly successful. So you do feel utterly useless surrounded by these young founders. Yeah. But you can't let that enter into your head. Otherwise, I would have given up long ago.
Yeah. All right, last rapid fire question. Is there anything that you believe to be true about the world of work, but don't yet have the data to support?
Remote will always be a thing. It's never going away.
I love that one. So much so that one of my negotiables for my next role that I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up is one of my non-negotiables is it has to be for a remote, intentionally remote company by design. Like that, they've chosen it. It's going to be the way. And my reason for that is the next company I'm the founder of or co-founder of will be, I'm not ready to get back in the saddle quite yet, but I know it will be remote and I want to experience like what that looks like. So if we can get that data, if you can get that data, we would love to talk about it because
That's where Josh
we agree with you.
That's where we go to Josh, not Helen, for help on that one. But that's my goal.
Maybe we can have a group discussion with Josh about that topic. So, but before we can wrap this conversation, we do have one final tradition. One question, one final tradition. The final question is, we're fortunate enough, speaking of Josh, to have you on as a guest today, largely due to this last question. Who should we bring on the show next? Is there anyone, a people leader or thought leader in our space that you feel absolutely needs to be heard?
Yeah, there's a couple of people for different reasons, because I really thought a lot about this. And the other thing I was thinking about was from a more like international perspective. And so when I was at the Irresistible conference, the Burson conference, I heard a lady called Johanna Soderstrom speak from Tyson Foods. Pragmatic, practical, no bullshit, incredibly humble, in a tough business and tough world, that was just coming at this in a very pragmatic way. And I really liked her style. And then there's another lady, I asked her if it was okay to mention her, and I haven't heard back from her, but only because I was late in the day asking her, so I hope she's fine with this. A lady called Alessandra Jockelson, who is the CHRO of Pure Storage. And I think Alessandra is Brazilian. And she just brings a very different perspective, a different way of thinking about things to the role of CHRO. And I just think she's very first principled. And I think that would be really interesting to pick her brains on how she looks at the world.
Well, we would be honored to have either or both of them on the show. So we'll definitely reach out to them. And that brings us to the end. I can't believe we're there, but we are. And our final tradition on the Modern People Leader is what we call one word or phrase close. We all respond with a word or a few words from the episode that we would like to close out our conversation with. And Helen, if you know your one word or phrase, we'll let you go first.
Well, humility would be my word.
Ooh.
My phrase would be, we is infinitely better than me.
Oh, love that. And you may be the first guest we've had that has done both. And I love that you did both. Yeah. You follow instructions well. Yeah, no, that was great. That's great. And both hard to beat. And we have the luxury of our asynchronous coordination, Daniel and I. So as you're talking, we have the benefit of being able to capture our phrases. I'm going to go with be a good human, because I think that is such an awesome way to judge the character of leaders in a general sense.
Another good one. I'm going to say recharged. Yesterday was, those days where it feels like everything's just going wrong. Like we had an Airbnb and there was no AC. They couldn't fix it. They had to order a new unit. We had to move to another Airbnb. We were tired because we couldn't sleep because our dog wouldn't let us sleep. And it was like
your co-founder grilled you about our metrics and our weekly team meeting.
And then, today, total Monday yesterday. And, to have this conversation today, I feel recharged.
It's awesome.
Love it. Love it. Well, Helen, we've already taken an hour and a half of your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute blast and it was well worth the wait. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Helen. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We wanna know what you think about the show. And you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. So thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.